it out right away. So a great example of what social equity right now is, we have a social equity program in Long Beach for people who qualify that's going to get them job placements in the cannabis industry. A lot of people are well aware that the cannabis prohibition is very rooted in hate and greed. That's part of the equality part now.
And just really quickly on top of that, so there is a rule, we're slowly rolling it out. It's a 40% equity hire, meaning that we've sort of staked out what demographics or psychographics qualify for the equity piece, and we say, all right, in due time, you need to be having at least 40% of your hours, so not 40% of your employees, but of the hours worked need to be equity hires. So that's people from communities that may have previously been disenfranchised by either the criminal justice system or simply don't have access to get into the industry as it is now.
I'll say one thing on that, and if we're kind of maybe jumping around because I know it might be one of your questions, but the way that the policy was created, because I actually worked on the policy when I was on the city side. So before I became executive director of this nonprofit, I was actually the policy director for Councilmember Richardson. And so we worked really closely with city staff on this policy to make sure that we were taking into consideration the industry's needs and the community's needs. And it doesn't have to be either or. I think it can very much be together. But what we found was that we couldn't just say, even though we know that Black and brown people were disproportionately targeted for marijuana possession, for marijuana sales, for all these other indicators, even though we know that all races pretty much use marijuana at the same rates. It's about 12 to 14% depending on which study you look at. But it was who was targeted, who was arrested, who was convicted, and who was actually put in jail and kept in jail. All of that, we can't even, it doesn't matter because we can't create a policy that says we can give Black and brown people jobs over other people. That's not what this is. That's not what social equity is. It's largely defined on geographic areas. So you can say that in this community, it's a low income community where I forgot the exact percentage, but a certain percentage of people live under the poverty line. These are the same communities where there were those disproportionate, targeting enforcement of cannabis. So it directly correlates, and why someone might not have lived there, 10 years ago when this was happening, 5 years ago when this was happening. I mean, we can argue if it's still happening, or not. But when it was, very prevalent, it's still a community impact. So I hope that clarifies it a little bit. And
to sort of go farther in that community impact, it's not just the person that gets arrested for marijuana that's impacted, right? So their mother, their children, the school they may mentor at, whatever it is, they're tied into that community. So when we're looking at that geographic region, we realize that so 12 to 14% may use marijuana or cannabis products, but what's the percentage of people that are actually impacted by the enforcement of those laws in those areas? And so then you see that ripple effect and how deeply it impacts those communities. So it was really important, and the work you did was great, to find those areas and see if we can't not give them a handout, but give them that pathway into the industry that they really set up, right? It was made legal, but all the channels of distribution, the growing, the science behind the growing. So a lot of you enjoy really good cannabis today. That was developed really in the black market. So they have every right to be a part of this industry now that it's legal. So that's.
Thank you guys. I would love to hop over to LARP, talking about people who have been affected and how now what you guys do, and even the LBCA, to try to reclassify and expunge some people.
Well, first of all, just what you guys are doing here and the number of people that are in this audience really curious about the details versus just the recreational part of it in itself is impressive to me, because this is where the work really happens. As was mentioned, there's so many different complexities at the state level, and then every city has a different process of distributing retail licenses or manufacturing licenses or growing licenses, or whatever it may be, that it's just kind of the wild, wild west right now. So you guys will really be the voices that determine how this policy goes or how, you know, the movement of issues go in your local area. For us, you know, our advocacy is with individuals who are in the federal prison system, in the state prison system, and in the local county jails. And it's just the disparity that you see just back to back to back, particularly around black and brown people. Sorry to beat that dead horse, but it's a fact that it's almost, you know, every list that you could look at where things are good or there's, you know, economic vibrancy, those groups of folks are typically at the bottom. But when you look at every negative issue, including health-related issues or educational-related issues or economic-related issues, they're at the bottom. I mean, they're at the top of them. They're just really disproportionately impacted by the worst circumstances you can imagine. And so cannabis is creating a whole nother stream of opportunity. And we're trying to get ahead of it and really deal with our elected officials. We were with Governor Newsom last Wednesday. We had a big conversation around what the direction of the state is in terms of really holding counties and cities accountable to this parity that we're looking for. And so, you know, it's a really complex issue because it is so convoluted at this point in time. But hopefully, you know, we educate community. We give folks that have been in the black market that have such a suspicious idea about government and things like that an opportunity to really figure out how do you legitimize yourself. And then we really create accountability where individuals on the policy side are not just looking at generating revenues without any real accountability to the people who are paying into whatever these taxes are, that we really demonstrate that we're intelligent about what we're doing. We've done the homework in creating opportunity and access for those who are on the outside, and hopefully over the next year, 2 years, as this thing begins to settle, that we present something that actually is beneficial for everybody in the local communities where this stuff is being distributed.
So micro interactions within the communities where all the education is going to take place, that's when you're actually going to make a difference and change, not change people, but shows people a different perspective. So I'd love for you guys to try to assist with finding the proper way to start these micro interaction conversations about social equity. How do we bring it up? What are some examples of why it's important that are in the daylight? A big thing and that people don't realize is just because it's not an issue to you doesn't mean it's not an issue to the people in your community or the people around you. So I'd love to open that up to the panel.
For me, I think, you know, firstly, I think this is sort of what you're talking about, this conversation right here. Yeah. And making sure that, I mean, when you look at the overall conversation of equity, it seems almost as if, you know, it's the structures behind it, right? So when we're having these conversations, it's important to make sure that you're looping in your local government and that you're not lobbying them, but you're taking them on that journey with you. You know, this is new ground, everyone. You brought up the Wild Wild West. That's exactly what's going on here. And it's California, and you know, we always try to do everything first and everything. So let's also try to do it right. And that's, you know, these conversations, the questions you all are going to ask, and just making sure that we're being mindful of our blind spots when we're going through this process. And I don't want to, because this is a great event space, but you brought up a great point. It's not ADA accessible. Yeah. So what voices today are we missing in this conversation? You know, especially when we're talking about cannabis as medicinal. Yes. Like, I'm all for your right to smoke weed and enjoy it recreationally, but we have to remember there are people that need it to get through the day. And so that's one blind spot. There's other blind spots that I might not be aware of. Yeah. And that's why we need to keep having these different conversations with as diverse a group as possible.